Hello there, I'm Janan Archibald. I'm the Legislative Liaison for One Sky Community Services, and I'm here today with Julian Acciard. He is running for Congress, for candidate for CD1 with primaries in September. Welcome, Julian.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
We're going to start out today. Hopefully you can just tell us a little bit about yourself and why you chose to run and what brought you to New Hampshire.
All right. Well, so my background, my dad actually was born in Lowell Hospital. He grew up in Atkinson. Everyone in my family, or I should say him and his siblings, all graduated from Timberlane High School in Atkinson. I moved up here when I was 12, come from a military background. My entire family served for about 140 years. I served myself in the Marines. I was medically retired. I'm a disabled veteran. And then I moved back home after getting off, after being a homeless veteran for a while, to work on Pease Air National Guard Base, and then eventually take over the family business, which I now run. And I decided to run for office because I got sick of people talking more at us than trying to solve the problem, and more political thuggery between both parties. So I decided to get involved. My background is Homeland Security, anti-terrorism, behavioral psychology, and business management.
Great. Well, thank you for joining us. So I have a few questions that were submitted by our community. So I'm going to jump right in with those, if that's okay.
Okay.
Okay. So our first one is, how do you view the current state of New Hampshire's system on disability supports? And what are your beliefs about the capabilities of people with intellectual disabilities?
Well, as far as I can't really say that I have an opinion on the disability supports within the state, because as much as I can read everything in the world. The issues of the actual person living through it are something that I need to hear directly, because I know, I mean, me personally as a disabled veteran dealing with the VA, I don't get the care that I need, and I know other veterans don't as well. But as far as the permanently disabled who are not veterans and the resources that are out there, I don't know whether they actually fulfill what the average person in that community needs, because it's not something that's widely televised. It's not something that's widely put out there, because most candidates don't actually try to solve these issues. We talk about them, but the reality is, as a potential federal legislator, these are a lot less of federal issues than they are state issues. So I can only help to the degree that federal funding is applied to these issues when it is available, or federal regulations, which I don't like the idea of federal regulations, because it's a one-off solution for 50 different states and a conglomerate of drastically different localities and issues. And I think the majority of these issues should be addressed locally. Like, I know personally, and a lot of times dealing with caregivers, the best caregiver is a spouse or family member. So educational requirements and certifications don't necessarily help, because I know my mother has caregivers, and they can't help her to the degree that a family member often can. And she's a disabled veteran as well.
Oh, well. So you kind of touched on this in this question. So I'm going to jump ahead to a question I was going to ask last, but now I'm going to move it up because it touches on sort of the same issue. You said that you don't get all the services that you are maybe entitled to through the VA. But in our community, if you were to ask a parent what their biggest concern is, you may hear, what happens when I am gone? It's a sentiment that's sort of echoed throughout the community. And what that means is it speaks to the amount of advocacy that's required in order to get the appropriate services and supports for their children. Why do you think the system requires such a strong advocacy presence to get the service that an individual is entitled to by law? And do you have any thoughts on how we fix this?
Well, I'm going to be honest and blunt. The reason why I take such a strong level of advocacy is because a lot of these people are incapable of voting, and they don't have funds, so they can't wield politicians. They can't move the needle for themselves. It basically means that there's no backlash for not supporting you. There's no ability, no recourse for a politician that says they'll help or pretends that they care. They don't actually have to solve the problem. It's easy for both sides of the aisle to talk about it and walk away. So, like, I am an advocate for it. I don't like the fact that we talk about these issues, especially as a disabled veteran, but we don't actually solve them. I think housing should be something that we. It's one thing to argue about people who are disabled and who are completely capable of holding a job, and they have a minor disability that your employer should be able to work with. And but it's for people who are completely incapable of having a job, who need housing, who their parents and their families care for them, and then when their parents die, they they end up falling through the cracks. Those people should have housing provided for them. Like, I land very libertarian on many issues, but this is not one of them. I should not see people with um, cerebral palsy on the streets, or with Parkinson's and are unable to even hold a pen on the streets. And yet, that you do see that the permanently disabled people with TBI. I know that's a big issue recently. Is a lot of people with traumatic brain injury, or especially with the issues around drug abuse and fentanyl, have rendered a lot of people permanently mentally disabled as well and incapable. So it's getting people housing should be something that we should be advocating for, and I'm definitely in favor of. I don't believe the rip the band-aid off methodology is going to be helpful with this.
So you said the housing part. So I'm not going to let you off easy with the housing question, because that is a big issue in the community.
Yeah.
And one of the questions that was submitted was lack of affordable and accessible housing continues to be a significant impediment to people with disabilities and their families achieving economic security. You've said that you're in support of housing, but do you have any changes that you would recommend or implement?
In the state, I don't know. Honestly, the housing issue specifically is a state and local issue. Work in conjunction. That's something that the federal government has failed on in every single regard. And that's definitely something you don't want the federal government involved in. I mean, hell, our military barracks, I lived in a barracks that had a black mold and asbestos for 40 years. It was condemned, and they just hid the paperwork, and now half of us got cancer. So that's something you definitely don't want, is the federal government being involved in that, because the infrastructure of the building will collapse before the federal government even decides to start working on it. To the degree that funds are available, the state government receives funds for tons of projects, including infrastructure, and we're running a state budgetary surplus right now. We should be able to allocate. I believe we're up over 200 million, and our rainy day fund. We should be able to parse some of that out to set aside housing for people within the state and their caregivers to be able to have affordable housing, so that they're not on the streets and they don't have to worry about whether or not they're going to have a roof over their head. I don't see any way that the federal government can fix that, but the state definitely can. This is something I know in Manchester and in Nashua, this is a big issue, but the state in general has a huge problem with housing prices that have gone up. And it's not just due to inflation, and it's not just due to the booming housing market. It's also due to the fact that the majority of the cost of everything in our state is funded by property taxes. And it's not necessarily a bad thing, but if we're not budgeting properly and we're always spending more than we were the previous year, then we're making the problem worse, not better.
Okay, very good.
And
Thank you.
there does have to be a real conversation about how to budget properly without continuously spending more and allocating it where it needs to, like housing.
Yeah. All right, very good. Thank you. My next question comes from a little different spin here. This is about social interaction.
No.
So, social interaction is an important part of development and well-being for everyone. But since the onset of COVID, it's been particularly difficult for people in this community to engage in activities outside the home. Between the lockdowns, the health risks, the lack of staff, and closures, it's further isolating individuals. Do you have any suggestions on how we break out of this cycle?
Honestly, until the I want to say until the government has finally rolled back lockdowns, mandates, mask mandates, and things of that sort. But until people start getting comfortable with being able to go outside, especially within a disabled community who still are very, very hesitant about going outside right now and being around large groups of people, I think the best thing to do would be partnering up with some of the other disabled community organizations and having small get-togethers and events where they can socialize, but in a safe environment where everybody is targeted within the same atmosphere and understands the issues that people are dealing with. Like I know from my perspective with veterans, when we need to get out of the house, when we're dealing with PTSD and anxiety issues, coming back from overseas, the best place for us to get out with is to be around other veterans who also understand the situation, so that we can be together without causing any greater issues. I think that would be good. I know as far as the mental health aspect, I'm not a big fan of many of the medications, antidepressants and things of that sort. And I know they can cause greater issues with other medications regarding the actual physical disability or other mental disabilities. I think it would be good to increase access to things like service dogs and stuff like that, because when you can't have human interaction and socialization, that service animal can fill in that gap and allow that person to be able to bleed off their stress, especially with the textual nature of petting an animal to the degree that you can.
Great. Thank you. And my last question is about IEPs, or the education space. So in the community, you often hear people expressing frustrations with IEP disputes. And this is sort of very subjective. To some people, the IEP process works great, and they have never had any problems with it. But for some people, it can be a little bit more challenging. So this question is really for the people who find it challenging. So there are families who feel they're being denied assistance from districts and often feel pressured into accepting supports that don't meet their needs. Do you have any recommendations on how families can get the advocacy and representation they require at IEP meetings?
Honestly, I don't. I've been fighting with schools for forever regarding education and the ability for the school to break out of the current system that they have and approach students where they are at rather than where we wish they were. I have friends who have kids who have IEPs or who have been involved in these disputes. I know quite a few. To be honest, I haven't heard a single person who hasn't fought with the school over an IEP, who hasn't had an IEP dispute. So it's something that I know is very, very prevalent, especially with I'll just be honest, say the education system is broken down. The one-off system that is supposed to approach everyone as if they are all exactly the same is not equipped to be able to address these many kids who increasingly are having problems learning. And when you start to look at the problems, you start to figure out that it's not that a lot of them, it's not that they have problems learning in general. It's that they learn differently than what the system provides. So all I can say is maybe we're going to have to take over school boards and going to have a tough talk with administrations, because administrations seem to be increasingly beholden to teachers' unions and not to the parents and the students that they're supposed to be serving.
Okay. Well, thank you. So that's all that I have for questions from the community. Do you want to tell us a little bit about how to follow your campaign and where to get more information on you?
So the campaign is Julian, that's Julian, the number 4nh.com. You can go there, read my policy. Please read my policy before offering support. I want to be held accountable. So I don't want people just supporting me because I say nice things.
Well, we appreciate you taking the time to speak with our community. I'm sure you'll hear some people reaching out. And thank you for offering your service for running.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.